We've had visitors from the West Coast come, shake their heads in disappointment, and inform us that these aren't mountains as we drive through the valleys and hollows nestled between tree-covered ridges here in central Pennsylvania. No, they tell us, these are just rolling hills, not even wrinkles on the face of the earth. Real mountains rise up, jagged, craggy, capped with snow, sharp as an axe blade. Real mountains, they would say, were described by Han Shan, that ancient Chinese poet, heard here in the voice of Gary Snyder. Clambering up the cold mountain path, the cold mountain trail goes on and on. The long gorge choked with scree and boulders, the wide creek, the mist-blurred grass. The moss is slippery, though there's been no rain. The pine sings, but there's no wind. Who can leap the world's ties and sit with me among the white clouds? I'm an old man now, having entered my 80th decade, and my backpacking days with my brothers in the high Sierras are long behind me. So I feel a certain kinship with the rounded hills here in the middle of Pennsylvania. Particularly when I recall that the Appalachians, this range we sit in, are 480 million years old, and were once as high as the Rockies and every bit as jagged as the Alps. They're part of a vast system that includes the Atlas Mountains in North Africa, the Scottish Highlands, and those mountains running north through Norway, separated from them by the inexorable widening of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and Rift. The Susquehanna River, which flows south only a couple miles from my home, is said to be one of the oldest rivers in the world. We live in a region that could mark its time in kalpas, that Indian concept of an almost inconceivably long period of time, measured out here by a dove who has almost completed her once-in-a-century flight over these hills of iron, caressing them with a silken scarf and eroding them with the faintest of touches. Soon, in another few million years or so, she'll have completed her task and worn them flat, and that kalpa will have only just begun. So if these mountains are now hills, they're venerable hills, and carry with them a sense of the eternal, perhaps lost on many of us crawling against their face. These are the ancient hills that King David might have looked to when he sang in Psalm 121, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. And the hills themselves reach out, warm and comforting, old and full of wisdom. But if help cometh from those hills, from whence cometh the hills themselves? In my Zen tradition, we might turn to the Blue Cliff Record, a collection of stories of encounters with ancient Zen priests, where we would find one such story entitled Yun Men's Staff Dragon, and we would hear Yun Men ask his monks that same question. As brief as it is, the story goes, Yun Men showed his staff to the assembly and said, this staff has become a dragon. It has swallowed up the whole universe, the mountains, rivers, and great earth. Where do they come from? We've heard this story or one like it before. There along the Nile River, Moses's brother Aaron cast down his rod, and it too changed, though not into a dragon. No, only into a serpent that swallowed up the serpents of the priests of Pharaoh, not having belly enough to take on the whole of the universe. Where indeed do the mountains, rivers, and great earth come from? The wise medieval Japanese priest and theologian Eihei Dogen knew. For these are very much the hills, mountains, and rivers that he had in mind when he wrote the Mountains and Waters Sutra in his collection of essays, the Shobogenzo. Not a sutra about the mountains and waters, but a recognition that the mountains and waters themselves were the sutra. Dogen saw the whole of our earth as the teaching, hills and valleys, rivers and streams, all convey the truths that our meager words can only hint at. His lesson began, mountains and waters right now are the actualization of the ancient Buddha way. Each, abiding in its phenomenal expression, realizes completeness. Because mountains and waters have been active since before the empty eon, they are alive at this moment. They have been the self since before form arose. They are emancipation, realization. 480 million years. Just how far back would the beginning of that empty eon be? The whole natural world is a manifestation of the teachings of the Buddha, which in turn is the world manifesting itself. Are alive, and not just with the sound of music. And here Dogen makes a leap and carries us with him as he breathes life into this vision of the mountains and waters and says, mountains do not lack the qualities of mountains. Therefore, they always abide in ease and always walk. You should examine in detail this quality of the mountains walking. Mountains walking is just like human walking. Accordingly, do not doubt mountains walking, even though it does not look the same as human walking. The Buddha ancestors' words point to walking. This is fundamental understanding. You should penetrate these words. We might hear Dogen talking of mountains and hills as mountains and hills always moving, always a part of the great tectonic motion of the earth. I have vivid memories of living near the Hayward Fault in Oakland, California, and seeing the sidewalks displaced, of feeling the earth shrugging its shoulders and rearranging the pictures on my walls. Brad Warner, a Zen priest, and his teacher Nishijima in Japan see some element, some inkling of this in Dogen's words, and coming as Nishijima does from a land of great seismic activity, there is something to be said for this. From another angle, the Reverend Hubert Neerman, in the translation of the Shobogenzo published by Shasta Abbey, sees mountains as reflecting the tradition of Zen teachers in ancient China, taking the name of the mountains on which their monasteries stood. David Hinton's translation of a koan collection, The Gateless Gate, emphasizes this by referring to teachers not by their Chinese or Japanese names, but by directly translating their names into English. Hence, Wellspring South Mountain rather than Nanchuan, 100 Elder Mountain instead of Baijiang. Mountains walking then are teachers ever changing and advancing, growing old, learning, evolving. And the waters themselves, the fluidity of Buddha nature. And Dogen may well have been including all of this, but as I walk through the countryside here in central Pennsylvania, as I lift up mine eyes under the hills, I do see them walking, just as that ancient Japanese master saw them walking, though, like me, they're old. These are not mountains that sprint, not youthful, athletic mountains. No, these are mountains that move with deliberation, that abide in ease, that saunter over towards the horizon, mountains that have heard John Muir's apocryphal attempt at etymology. They would have us know that back in the Middle Ages, people used to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land, the Sainte-Terre, and became known as Sauntereurs or Saunterers. These mountains are our holy land, and we ought to saunter through them reverently. But of course, it's not so much that we saunter through the mountains and hills as that they saunter through us. And like that other ancient Chinese worthy, Changshan, the hills and mountains come back chasing the falling flowers. And so here, another tale of sauntering in the mountains. One day, Changshan went off to wander in the mountains. When he returned, the head monk of the temple met him at the gate and asked, "Where have you been?" "I've been strolling about in the hills," he replied. "Which way did you go?" asked the head monk. "I went out, following the scented grass, and came back chasing the falling flowers." "That's exactly the feeling of spring," said the head monk. "It's better than autumn dew falling on lotuses," said Changsha. A mountain monk wanders in the mountains wander in him and in us. Spring, autumn, winter, time passes, hours, days, weeks, kalpas, eons. Let's hear once more from Han Shan, who tells us again with Gary Snyder, "I've lived at Cold Mountain these 30 long years. Yesterday I called on friends and family. More than half had gone to the Yellow Springs, slowly consumed like fire down a candle, forever flowing like a passing river. Now, morning, I face my lone shadow. Suddenly my eyes are bleared with tears." Like Rip Van Winkle returning after so much time in the mountains, 30 years. If there's so much to lose over those long years, half your friends and family passed over to the other side, to the Yellow Springs, there's still so much to gain. The Chinese Zen master Qingyuan Huixing took ample time to consider mountains and said, 30 years ago, before I began the study of Zen, I said, "Mountains are mountains, waters are waters." After I got an insight into the truth of Zen through the instruction of a good master, I said, "Mountains are not mountains, waters are not waters." But after having attained the abode of final rest, that is, awakening, I say, mountains are really mountains, waters are really waters. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Mountains, waters, walking, flowing, streaming, all different, at one and the same time, all the same. Walking down Turtle Creek Road, the horizon shaped by the backs of mountains, of the rolling hills, stirring in their midwinter sleep, stretching, yawning, waking up, ambling with me over the countryside, the work of the ancient Buddhas, just as the ancient Buddhas are our work. We walk the hills walk us. The ducks and cranes swim the streams swim the ducks and cranes who spread their wings, lift and soar overhead. Ducks, cranes, rivers, streams, the mountains and valleys, the hills and hollows, rivers and streams walk there, flow there, just there, just there. Where do we begin? Where do the hills drop away? Take a step. Is it you taking that step? Is it the ground beneath? Walking, you, me, the hills and valleys, just walking. Self drops away, walking remains. And so in the verse to the 35th koan in the Gateless Gate, we hear the old sage Wu Men leave us with these lovely words. The mountains and the clouds are the same. Mountains and valleys are different. All are blessed. All are blessed. Is this one? Is this two? Thank you.